The mysterious disappearance of Maura Murray. Now, a unique thing about the Maura Murray disappearance case is that it's known for being called the first crime mystery of the social media age. This is because Facebook was launched only 5 days before Maura went missing. Of course, there's much speculation about her case, as to be expected, and some have even called it the most highly speculated case of the 21st century. Maura's disappearance remains a mystery that is unsolved to this day. First, let's talk about Maura Murray and who she was. Maura was born in Brockton, Massachusetts on May 4, 1982, to parents Fred and Laurie Murray, making her their youngest daughter. Her father, Fred, was a medical technician, and her mother, Laurie, was a nurse. Maura had grown up in Hanson, Massachusetts, which is a small suburb on the South Shore. Her family was a typical working-class family. She had a lot of guidance from her siblings. She had an older brother named Fred Jr., 2 sisters, Julie and Kathleen, and her youngest brother, Curtis. When Maura was 6, however, her parents divorced. Maura was described as being an overachiever who excelled both athletically and academically. She was also a member of the National Honor Society. Also, at the same time, she was very active in her local community, where she would become known for her kind heart, signature dimples, and beautiful smile. As if that wasn't enough, she also participated in nearly every sport available to her, including competitive AAU basketball, which also allowed her to travel all over New England. As a fierce competitor, Maura had consistently finished in the top tier of runners in the state of Massachusetts and even broke several long-standing school records at the time. She had graduated at the top of her class at Whitman-Hanson Regional High School with her pick of colleges to choose from, both athletically and academically. But she ended up deciding to accept a congressional nomination from the late Senator Edward Kennedy and would be joining her sister Julie at the prestigious United States Military Academy located at West Point. Maura had continued to excel at the rigorous military and academic program there and even established herself to be a force on the cross-country and track teams. However, during the second year she was at West Point, she decided that the military life was not for her and then transferred to the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. That's when she also decided to pursue a career in nursing. During Maura's freshman year at West Point, she received an honor code violation for stealing some makeup from a Fort Knox commissary. This incident didn't formally expel her, however, that is when she transferred into the nursing program at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. There was another incident in November of 2003, just 3 months prior to her disappearance, when she was caught ordering food with a stolen credit card. Maura's arrest record showed that the charge would have been dismissed after 3 months of good behavior. In the days leading up to Maura's disappearance, on February 5, 2004, she was working her evening shift doing campus security. After a phone call with her older sister Kathleen, she was said to have burst into tears and even had to have a supervisor escort her back to her dorm room. When she was asked what was bothering her, Maura simply responded, "My sister." Kathleen claims that the conversation was about her drinking and abusing of alcohol. See, Kathleen herself had just been discharged from a rehab program, and she then admitted to Maura that her fiancé had taken her to the liquor store. On Saturday, February 7th, Maura's dad, Fred, had arrived in town to help take her car shopping. According to Julie, her sister Maura's car was in very rough shape, and she wanted something that was going to be more reliable. That night, Maura had borrowed Fred's car and attended a party that was going on at the campus. At 3:30 a.m., when she was driving back to Fred's motel room, she had hit a guardrail and caused about $10,000 worth of damage to the car. The cops had arrived at the scene and drove her back to the motel. Now, there's no documentation of a sobriety test in the accident report. It was a car that Fred had rented and returned it to his home located in Connecticut on February 8th. He then spoke to Maura on the phone at around 11:30 p.m. to remind her that she needed to get accident forms from the Registry of Motor Vehicles. And this is what we know about the events of February 9, 2004. It would be the last time the 21-year-old Maura would be seen. Just after midnight, Maura had searched MapQuest for directions to the Berkshires and Burlington, Vermont. At 1 p.m., Maura had emailed her boyfriend to let him know that she didn't like talking to anyone lately. She did promise to call him later, though. Then around 1:13 p.m., Maura had made a phone call to check about a condo rental unit located in Bartlett, New Hampshire. She knew the area with the condos because her family had vacationed there in the past. The phone call lasted about 3 minutes, and at the end, no rental plans were made for the condo. Maura had then called a fellow nursing student. At 1:24 p.m., Maura had sent word to a nursing school supervisor to let them know that she would be out of town for approximately a week because there was a death in the family. However, her family insists that there was no such death. At 2:05 p.m., Maura called a number that provides pre-recorded information on booking hotels in Stowe, Vermont. The phone call then lasted about 5 minutes. At 2:18 p.m., Maura then left her boyfriend a voicemail. The call lasted about 1 minute, and she said they would talk later. Maura had packed her car with clothing, birth control pills, textbooks, and toiletries. With a later searching of her dorm room, they found that most of Maura's belongings were packed in boxes, that her art had been removed from the walls, and the police found a printed email in the room between Maura and her boyfriend at the time, which indicated they were having relationship problems. At 3:30 p.m., Maura drove away in her 1996 Saturn sedan. Classes that day had been canceled because of an impending snowstorm. At 3:40 p.m., Maura then withdrew $280 from an ATM and picked up $40 worth of alcohol from a nearby liquor store. Security footage at both the ATM and liquor store determined that she was alone. Around 4 to 5 p.m., Maura had left Amherst. Her last recorded phone call was then at 4:37 p.m. to check her voicemail. At 7:27 p.m., Faith Westman of Woodsville, New Hampshire, had called 911 to report an accident that was outside of her home. She had heard a loud thump, then saw a car along the snowbank on Route 112. The car was pointing westward in the eastbound lane. Faith's neighbors, Virginia and John Murat, also noticed Maura's car outside of their kitchen window. The car's hazard lights were on, and they noticed someone walking around the car as well. As the Murats were watching, another neighbor, Bud Atwood, had pulled up to Maura in the school bus that he drove for his work. Atwood then got out of his bus and asked if Maura needed him to call the police for her. Maura said no, claiming that she had already called AAA, so there was no need. Atwood knew that the area did not have any cell phone service, so he didn't believe her story. He then offered to let her wait at his home until the assistance could arrive, but Maura insisted she was fine just staying at her car. Atwood then headed back home to call 911. He said initially he had trouble getting through to the dispatch because of the busy phone circuits. However, his phone call eventually went through at 7:43 p.m. At 7:46 p.m., the Haverhill Police Sergeant Cecil Smith had arrived at the scene, following up on Westman's 911 call. However, the car was locked, but there was no sign of Maura. The car's airbags had been deployed, and there was a crack in the driver's side windshield. Sergeant Smith spotted a box of Franzia wine behind the driver's seat and also an empty beer bottle. There was red liquid on the driver's side door, the car's ceiling, and on the road, too. A later search found a Coke bottle that was filled with a red drink that smelled like alcohol. The Kahlua, Bailey's, and vodka that Maura had bought earlier at the liquor store were not found in the car. Her cell phone, wallet, and credit cards have never been located. Sergeant Smith went to the Westmans in order to ask about the incident. Then he stopped at the Atwoods to ask where the girl had gone to. After explaining to the officer that he hadn't seen anyone since he left the vehicle, both Atwood and Sergeant Smith drove around the area in hopes of finding Maura. 10 minutes after Sergeant Smith's arrival, both the fire truck and EMS had pulled up to the scene. At 8:49 p.m., the scene was cleared and Maura's vehicle was towed away. An APB was then issued for Maura after 12 p.m. on February 10th, and she was first to be considered missing at 5:17 p.m. Then, the next day, the authorities had police dogs track her scent. They got a hit on her about 100 yards east of where her vehicle had been abandoned before the dogs lost the trail. The FBI was called in at 10 days after her disappearance, and then it became a nationwide search. At the 10-day mark, the New Hampshire Fish and Game were brought in to conduct their own ground and air searches using a helicopter that was equipped with a thermal imaging camera. However, Maura's family disputes these claims. Police repeatedly voiced concerns that she could be a danger to herself. Many people have criticized the police for their lack of urgency during the initial days. It was almost a full day by the time Maura had been announced as missing, and even then, an official search wasn't immediately commenced. Here's some of the popular theories behind Martha's disappearance, and again, these are just conjecture. Her intentions that day was to disappear. She'd been planning to meet up with someone, and whoever the person was must have picked her up after the car crash. Another theory, she'd been abducted. A third theory, she must have walked away from her car, possibly to flee the scene of the crash because she was afraid of getting in trouble and then succumbed to the elements. And another, Maura had left that day to take her own life alone in the mountains. More on the first theory, that Maura had intentions that day to disappear. It's worth noting the claims of James Renner, who's an investigative journalist. He largely believes that Maura is in fact still alive and that she'd planned her own escape because she was pregnant. Maura did make a search online for the effects of alcohol on a fetus. However, there were some of her nursing school friends who later on said this was research for an assignment. Journalist Renner had also reported that one of Maura's friends sent him an email that accused Maura's boyfriend Bill of being abusive to her. However, recently Bill Roche was indicted by grand jury on felony abuse charges. There were also rumors that Maura had been in a relationship with a man by the name of Hossein Baghdadi, who was an assistant track coach at the University of Massachusetts. Baghdadi has been open about the situation and has even told detectives that Maura had hinted to him that she was thinking she may disappear. The UMass Outing Club actually owns a cabin that is in the White Mountains, and that's where some think she was heading to. There's no communication suggesting that Maura and Baghdadi had been communicating in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. On James Renner's blog, he bluntly accused Fred of having knowledge of what exactly happened to Maura, citing his unwillingness to be interviewed by Renner as suspicious. In a Boston Magazine article, Renner even states, quote, "There's nothing that would please me more than to depose Fred in court under oath," end quote. Now, in defense of Fred, some have said, it has been over 16 years of nonstop searching for his missing daughter, and that could indeed wear anyone down over the years, and there are very few avenues that he hasn't investigated personally. However, Fred says he has no doubt that Maura was abducted that day. It was then, in late 2004, when a man by the name of Larry Moulton had come forward with a knife that he thought could have been the murder weapon. The knife belonged to his brother Claude, who lived only 3/4 of a mile away from the crash site in an A-frame house. In 2006, Clyde no longer lived at the house, and the new owners let private investigators inspect it. It was then that the cadaver dogs made a hit, so they took carpet samples for testing. However, the chain of custody was unclear, and the samples were conveniently lost. Moulton's knife was then turned over to the New Hampshire State Police, and the results were never released. The Missing Maura Murray podcast had returned to the A-frame house in 2016. What they found when going back looked to be bloodstains in a closet. They ended up sending the wood chips to a molecular geneticist, who was then able to confirm the presence of human blood. Unfortunately, the samples were too deteriorated in order to determine with 100% certainty whether or not the blood was Maura's. There was another house, however, that was near the Scent Dogs Trail that was searched back in 2019 after the ground-penetrating radar had showed a disturbance in that home's basement. The investigators had removed the concrete and searched several feet down, but sadly, no evidence was present. Now, the theory of an opportunistic killer might be statistically less probable, but it can't be just ruled out. 1 month after Maura had gone missing, a 17-year-old girl named Brianna Maitland had disappeared in Vermont. Some people feel like it could have been possible that both women fell prey to a serial killer. The authorities looked into the connection that was between Maitland and a serial killer at the time named Israel Keys. However, this would later be ruled out by the FBI. In the online sleuth community, many believe that Keys is indeed to blame. That theory has a big problem with it, though: how small the window of opportunity was for murder to then take Maura, avoiding being seen. Butch Atwood only had a swift interaction with Maura, talking to her for only a few minutes, so she couldn't have been alone for more than 10 to 15 minutes when Sergeant Smith arrived. It was in a desolate, heavily wooded area, after all. There were at least 3 neighbors that could see her from their homes. There's another name that's frequently brought up when talking about Maura Murray, that of Rick Forcier. Rick Forcier had been driving home from his job as a contractor on the night of February 9th. That is when he spotted a woman walking in the woods that matched the description of Maura. There are some people who find his story a little suspicious because it was months later when he finally reported the sighting. Forcier had told police officers that he hadn't realized it was the same night until he went back through his work calendar, and that was in late April. The Murray family are adamant in the fact that Maura was not a threat to herself. That is something we know already. However, we need to take the theory that she wandered into the woods and passed away from the elements into consideration. Could it have been Occam's razor, which is widely referred to by those who consider the simplest explanation to be the most accurate? When we set all these assumptions about the case aside, the absolute facts are A young woman had crashed her car and was last seen outside in the freezing cold weather. Whichever theory resonates with you, one astounding thing is the fact so many persons of interest were named, especially for a case that doesn't have any true suspects that have been named by the authorities. Recently, there was a new search on Wednesday, July 13, 2022, for Maura Murray. Police personnel in 2 different New Hampshire towns searched the areas of Landaff and Easton. The ground search was in an area that was off of Route 112 and is, quote, not the result of new information in the case, end quote. That's according to New Hampshire Attorney General John M. Formella in a press release about the search. He continues, it is part of an ongoing investigative process and will consist of a more extensive search of surrounding areas previously searched in a more limited fashion. Because the investigation is still ongoing, Formella and the State Police Colonel Nathan Nays said that no more information could be released at this time, and he asked the public to respect the privacy of the communities and residents. People should also remember to stay off private property. My family is aware of the search efforts and are working closely with law enforcement at this time, said Julie Murray, Maura's sister. She continues, we ask the public not to interfere with the investigation. We will share information as appropriate. We're encouraged by the active efforts to find Maura and remain hopeful for a resolution. If there's anyone who has any information about Maura Murray's disappearance, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem, they're asked to please call the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit at number 603-223-3648, or you can email coldcaseunit@dos.nh.gov. More information on Maura and the ongoing efforts to help find her and bring her home may be found on the website mauramurraymissing.org. Back in January 2022, the FBI then created a violent criminal apprehension profile in Maura Murray's case. Maura's sister has stated in published reports that it is another method for multiple agencies and other jurisdictions to share their information with one another. Now, back in September of 2021, there were bone fragments found at the base of Loon Mountain. However, according to officials, they were not connected to Murray. The officials announced that the fragments could date back as far as the 18th century. The bone fragments had been found in what they called, quote, existing soil, unquote, stated the New Hampshire State Police. Radiocarbon dating had placed a 95% certainty that the bones that were found are from a person that died sometime between the years of 1774 to 1942. Quite a gap there. On Maura Murray's 38th birthday, they launched a website that offers the public never-before-seen pictures of her. It's also a repository of news reports that date back to 2004 and is an opportunity for people who are interested in knowing more about the case and to get to know Maura in an up-close and personal way. There's another feature of the blog post that is regularly updated, so our family can put out information to help keep the community informed and keep Maura's name in the public. A contact tab allows visitors to the site to communicate with their family members, plus there's a contact tab that provides people email updates on any important case developments if and when they come out. There is even a tip submission area, which provides a place where people can provide any new information or leads. Now, this is an unsolved mystery that has more twists and turns than the route Maura had taken that fateful night. Hopefully one day, the record can be set straight about what exactly happened to young Maura Murray on that cold night. Well, friends, there you have it. I look forward to your comments, but please keep it friendly and respectful. Till we meet again, be good to yourselves and each other. As for me, I'll see you a little farther on down the trail. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll talk to you next time. Tell your pets I said hi.